Hey everyone, Zach and Pamela from PerformancePlusProgramming.com, and today we're talking about fixing a hip shift during a squat. So if your squat looks like this, you're going to want to take a look at the tips that we have for you. So notice how as Pamela descends down, you're going to see that barbell is uneven and her hips are clearly shifting towards the left side. We want to fix that hip shift, and it can happen for a couple of different reasons. The most common reason that I see as a physical therapist is individuals that are in pain. And a lot of times your brain will want to protect you from that pain, so it will force you to shift to the side. You might not even notice that that's happening, and you might even notice if your training partners pointed it out or if you look at a video of yourself, but it is often very hard to change a pain-derived hip shift in a squat until we actually address the pain. So get the tissues that are irritated calm down, and then often you will see that hip shift correct itself. If you're in a situation where you're not in pain, you've rehabbed that already, but you're still experiencing a hip shift, then there are two general categories that we tend to see a hip shift come from. The first is a strength-derived hip shift. And so we see this a lot. Here's a case example of one athlete that I treated recently that had a giant hip shift in his squat. But the important thing to note in that individual squat was that it only happened when he approached maximal loading, when he was lifting over 75% of his 1 rep max. When he was at lighter weights, that hip shift didn't exist. What that would indicate if you're in that situation is it is not a mobility limitation, because mobility doesn't care if it's a lightweight or a heavyweight, but strength does. So essentially this individual is getting up to a weight that overloaded his relatively weak quads on one side, and he ended up shifting his weight away from that side as he came out of the squat. So that's why when you see him stand up, he has that clear shift to the side because he tries to get this quad out of the way and then stand up. It's essentially what we call a good morning squat pattern, but it is only happening on one side. So again, if it changes as more weight is put on board, it's probably not mobility, it is probably strength, and we need to decide where are we lacking strength in terms of quads, glutes, low back, and we need to start building that up. If you have a hip shift, almost no matter what weight's on the bar or what squat variation you're doing, then we need to address your mobility. So we're gonna look at the ankles and the hips in terms of mobility. So let's start with the ankles. Pamela's gonna pop one of her shoes off. We're gonna test this on both sides, but you need to be barefoot for this test. And we're gonna get her big toe positioned 1 hand width away from this box. So she's gonna put her hand up against the box, get her big toe right up against her thumb, and I want to see does she have enough ankle mobility to touch her knee to the wall, and we're going to compare that side to side. We're going to also make sure that as she does this, she's coming straight forward and back. She's not rotating her body as she comes forward. You'll see some individuals, their knee will come in and their hip will shift out as they do that, and that's their way of kind of cheating around stiff ankles. Make sure you're going straight forward and back. If there's a different side to side, very commonly that is a contributor to your hip shift in the squat. We also want to look at hip mobility. So to test that, I'm going to have Pamela lay on her back. This is better done with a partner than by yourself. And we're going to look at her hip rotation on each side. So I'm going to bend this leg up so that her knee is directly over her hip. And I'm going to simply bring her leg in while maintaining that knee over hip position. And I'm going to look at how much external rotation of her hip she has and how much internal rotation of her hip she has. And we're gonna look at that on both sides and kind of compare on both sides. And very often, you'll notice that one of those hips has more or less of one of those angles, and working on your mobility specific to which is different and asymmetrical side to side will also often help correct that hip shift in the squat. So address pain, address any strength deficits, and then start looking at your mobility. When you run those tests, if you find any of those issues being off, check out the different programs that we offer at PerformancePlusProgramming.com. Everything from strength isolation programs to build up your quads, to build up your glutes, as well as mobility programs to address the hip mobility limitations that you may have found or the ankle mobility limitations, and use those to help correct your hip shift.